questions. If people would like, I'll keep track and please try to keep your question relatively brief. Yes.
We hear about people not going to vote for whatever reason. Is there any data that is currently available which says below a certain level in the polls, people are just going to take all of that, our candidate can't win, and they're not going to vote?
Well, there have been several reports of responses to questions about how likely are you to vote, how certain are you to vote, and that those proportions are lower than they have been in recent elections. But we haven't, gotten to the point of the campaign where there's, the parties put on a big push. The other unknown is we know that there's a big difference in the funding of the Trump campaign compared to the funding of the Clinton campaign. And that typically has two consequences: less presence on television, but also less money devoted to get out the vote efforts in the states. And this will hurt the electorate overall, potentially, by decreasing turnout or not stimulating turnout. And it's liable, this is, I think, one of the big unknowns about the end of the campaign. It's liable to hurt Trump more than it is Clinton.
Yes.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Sure.
Can anyone speak to the down ticket impact on the Republican side and the fact that potentially there would maybe voter turnout or outreach efforts from candidates down ticket, recognizing that people might not be turning out driven solely by a Trump vote?
Well, one of the things that the Trump organization has been relying on is Republican efforts at the national and state level. I would say that one other potentially serious factor could be the reductions in straight ticket voting options on the ballot, which will affect, if people have to go through the ballot and the ballot gets long, if they have to go through the ballot office by office, the people who will suffer as candidates will be the people far down on the ballot. There was an interesting piece in the paper this morning that said that while the court had invalidated a large part of a North Carolina law about voter ID and so on, they let stand the elimination of straight ticket voting in North Carolina, and you know that this is an issue in Michigan that will be addressed again.
Let's use this if we're going to use it. I want to say something about that. Speaking to someone recently, there's who would know about this, that the estimate on the Clinton side of things in that organization is that Trump is way behind the Clinton administration in mobilizing local turnout, at least organizationally. This same person said a big fear in the Clinton campaign is that Trump is going to do better at election day than he is in the polls for many of the reasons that we know about social desirability, and that independents may cut more for Trump than previous models have shown cutting for the typical Republican presidential candidate. So those are fears on the Clinton side anyway. Hakeem.
So we talk a lot about what's going on the right, but I wanted to hear from some of the panelists about aspects of the left that at least appear in the popular press and in conversations to be equally disaffected. So thinking about younger voters and African American voters, there seems to be this growing new left and both of these demographic groups. So hoping that some of you, Tasha and others, might speak to what our expectations might be moving forward with these two populations.
Can you use the mic?
In terms of their attachment to the Democratic Party moving forward in the election.
Well, certainly there's an understanding for this election there's a rhetoric about not throwing your vote away, right? There's a anti-Trump sentiment, mobilization effort to get people out to vote. I would be very surprised if voter turnout among blacks would recede below 2008, given that among African Americans, given the concerted effort to mobilize blacks throughout the nation.
And
What
so this
happens
rhetoric on
moving
the
forward?
left, from folks like Tom Hotsey and others about, the Democratic Party is no longer maybe the party that's really doing it for black folks. It's probably not reaching down to those levels.
Not at the presidential level, because it's not really about the candidate as much as, it's not about the Democratic candidate as much as it is about the anti-Republican candidate at this point. Moving forward, it remains to be seen. But for 2016, I think for black voters, there definitely is the idea that no Trump by any means necessary.
Yes.
Would someone please address the youth vote question, part of his question?
Youth vote.
Well, we've known for some time that young people are the least likely age cohort to participate in elections. So on the one hand, it's not surprising that Hillary Clinton is having a difficult time trying to get young people to the polls. I think the real issue is whether or not the election will be transformative for some different cohorts, one of which would be young people, other cohorts of minorities, in terms of developing a Democratic affiliation going forward, as opposed to a Republican one, as a mark of the discourse during the current campaign. But we'll have to see. I mean, I think that this could be the most important long-term consequence of the 2016 campaign. We know that voting is a form of habitual behavior, and one reason that young people don't vote is because they haven't had a lot of practice. They haven't had many opportunities. And a lot of them are not strongly associated with the place in which they live, and they're not taxpayers or not direct taxpayers and so on. So these initial events are important in how their behavior develops, but I wouldn't expect very high turnout ordinarily. I think the Obama 2008 election was relatively unique in that regard.
We see the participation rate has increased since 1990s. Should we consider this rate as a kind of indicator of the social conflicts? That means where social conflicts have increased since 1990.
Which rate? Which rate?
Turnout rate.
Oh, participation.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's causally related to that, although, I mean, the other thing that's happened since 1990 is elections have gotten very close, extremely close, so that we don't know until the end, very end, who's going to win. And we know that close races boost turnout, and we have other big historical events like the unique election, first election of an African-American president, which was inspiring to a lot of non-voters and caused turnout to go up. So there's a lot of other things happening other than this, what many of us are seeing as an increase in social conflict or racial conflict, ethnic disagreements in politics. So we have this affective polarization, which many have noted is a bad and scary thing, where we hate the out group, the out party, much more than we used to. But we often overlook the fact that that also drives turnout up. So we get more people participating when they don't like each other and when they're angry, and that's for what it's worth. So that there is that possibility that some of the turnout changes because of that.
Okay, last one right here.
Is there a gender gap in turnout?
Yes, there is a gender gap in turnout, and the tipping point occurred in the 1990s. All through the 80s, the participation rate of women was increasing, but men still voted at a higher rate than women. Then we had more women voting than men because there are more women in the population than men. But then, in the 1990s, the turnout rate of women began to exceed the turnout rate of men. And so the participation gap by gender actually has been increasing.
So the 13% in favor of Clinton is likely to remain.
The 13%.
13%
Yes.
in favor of Clinton is likely to remain.
Yes, and I think that both Nick and Tasha said that this is about the average
Yeah, I'm quoting
rate.
the-
Yes, in recent elections. There's no, but I think this is one of these half empty, half full questions. Sometimes people ask, why isn't the gender gap for Clinton running against Trump bigger? But I think Tasha's data showed that it's got a very strong racial component associated with it too. And the gap doesn't get any bigger because white women are reluctant to support Hillary Clinton. More reluctant to support Hillary.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I want to thank the panelists. Thank you.